I'm going to talk to you today about factoring quadratic trinomials. In your notes, this starts on page 7, and just so you know, this is something you've done before, so you should remember doing this. And it has also been called unfoil because it's kind of doing the opposite of foil. So if we take a look on page 7 of our notes, we can see that a quadratic polynomial is in this form right here. It's ax squared plus bx plus c. And the ones we're going to do today is where the a is a 1, so you'll just have an x squared plus bx plus c. This form is a quadratic form, and so we're going to start working with these. First of all, this is the opposite of foil. So if you take a look a little further down on the page, you'll see what we call factors, two factors, x plus 2 and x plus 6. Those are factors. They're binomial factors. If you use FOIL to multiply these, like I know you know how to do, you'll get the trinomial x squared plus 8x plus 12. This is a quadratic trinomial. What we're going to be doing today is figuring out how to start with the trinomial and to figure out what two binomials it came from. That's what we're going to be figuring out how to do today. So what we're doing is called factoring. And if we take a look further on down the page, I've got an example of one. So we're going to start out by factoring x squared plus 14x plus 24. And something I want you to realize is that when we FOILed, the x squared came from the two firsts, which would be x times x, would be how you would get an x squared. And the lasts were multiplied out to 24. We just have to figure out what numbers that would be. And obviously, there are some options. But when we do this, we're dealing with our first and our last. For example, let me show you. When we factor this into two binomials, our firsts are x and x. Our lasts go here and here. That's what we need to figure out. We know that they're going to multiply to 24, but there are a lot of options for that. There's 1 in 24, 2 in 12, 3 in 8, 4 in 6. And the question is, which of those, when I FOIL it, is going to give me this trinomial? And what I need to remember is that this number here in the middle, the 14x, this comes from the inners, here's the inners, and the outers added together. So when I'm doing this, what I'm looking for is what multiplies to 24 and adds to my middle number of 14. All right, so again, what I'm going to do is go through everything I know that multiplies to 24. So I have 1 and 24, that adds to 25. 2 and 12, that adds to 14. 3 and 8, which adds to 11. And 4 and 6, which adds to 10. So the one I'm looking for is the 2 and the 12 because it multiplies to 24 and it adds to 14. So what that means is that my factors are x plus 2 and x plus 12, as you can see right here at the bottom of my page. Let's go ahead and turn the page now to page number 8. We'll do a few more examples. You're probably remembering how to do this about now. And as we look at this next example, we've got here x squared plus 9x plus 20. We're trying to figure out what multiplies to 20 and adds to 9. So we're going to go through what multiplies to 20. That's 1 and 20, 2 and 10, and 4 and 5. And we're looking for the pair of numbers that adds up to 9. So that would be the 4 and the 5. They multiply to 20. They add to 9. So what that means for us is that our two factors are going to be x plus 4 times x plus 5. Let's go to the next example. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 24 and add to 11 in x squared plus 11x plus 24. And again, we're going to go through our factors that will multiply to 24. That's 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. And the one that adds to 11 is going to be the 3 and the 8. So when we factor this, our two factors are going to be x plus 3 and x plus 8. And I always get some students who ask me this. Does it matter when you're doing this if you have the x plus 3 first and the x plus 8 second, or could you have the x plus 8 first? It doesn't matter which one you put first. There are two things are multiplied, and if you remember our commutative property, it's still going to multiply to be the same thing if we switch the order. So let's go here to example C. And this one's different because it has a minus here. So we have x squared minus 11x plus 24. And we need to ask ourselves what multiplies to 24 but would add up to a negative 11. So when we go ahead and do this, we have to think about what kind of numbers they are. In order to multiply to a positive 24, it either has to be two positive numbers, which will add to a positive, or two negative numbers, which will add to a negative. So clearly, this is going to be two negative numbers. So let's go through what they might be. How about negative 1 and negative 24? We've got negative 2 and negative 12, negative 3 and negative 8, negative 4 and negative 6. And clearly the ones that add to negative 11 are negative 3 and negative 8. What that means for us is that our two factors are going to be x minus 3, x minus 8. Our next example, we've got x squared plus 5x minus 24. This time, in order to multiply to a negative 24, it's going to have to be one positive and one negative number. So this is going to give us a lot more possibilities to choose from. But we need them to add to a positive 5. That means out of the two numbers, the bigger one has to be positive and the smaller one has to be negative. So let's go ahead and figure out what could multiply to 24. So first of all, we have 1 and 24. The bigger one has to be positive, the smaller one in this case, negative. These add to a positive 23, so that's not it. We could also have 2 and 12. The bigger one would have to be positive, so the 2 would be negative, and we'd have negative 2 and 12 gives us 10. That's not it. We also have 3 and 8. Again, the bigger one has to be positive, the smaller one negative. These two happen to add up to a positive 5, so these will be the numbers that we're going to use. And that means that our factors are x minus 3, x plus 8. And let's go down to the last one on our page, and this is x squared minus 7x minus 18. This time, our two numbers have to multiply to a negative, so one's positive and one's negative, but since they add to a negative, the bigger one has to be negative. So let's think about what multiplies to 18. Well, we have 1 and 18, but as we said, the bigger one would have to be negative. 1 and negative 18 gives us negative 17, so that's not it. Then we have 2 and 9. The bigger one would have to be negative. 2 and negative 9 adds up to negative 7. We don't even need to get to 3 and 6 because we have already found the numbers that are going to work for us. So what that means is that our factors are x plus 2 and x minus 9. And just so you know, you can always check your answer by foiling it. If you just foil this, if you're correct, you will get this trinomial. If you've got your signs mixed up or if you have the wrong numbers, this will come out to be something different than what you started with, and that'll be your clue to know that it is incorrect. Let's go ahead to page 9 of our notes. When we look at this page, you're going to notice something that looks maybe a little bit more difficult. For examples, some expressions that look complex to factors, such as these right here, are really just quadratic polynomials and can be factored easily using unfoil. So for example, if you can do this one right here, you can easily do these. They're just a little bit different, each one of them. And let's go ahead and we'll go through how that is. So if we scroll down the screen here a little bit, we find out what multiplies to negative 10 and adds to 3, and that would be positive 5 and negative 2. So this factors as x plus 5, x minus 2. Now that we know this, we can do all of these, which are really just that same quadratic trinomial, just with something different. For example, this one here just has an extra y squared at the end with a y in the middle. This one has a y squared at the beginning with a y in the middle. This one, instead of having an x squared here and an x in the middle, has an x to the 4th at the beginning and an x squared in the middle. This one, instead of having an x squared and an x, has an x to the 6th and an x to the 3rd in the middle. And this one has the x's at the end instead of at the beginning. Other than that, they're pretty much the same. And let me show you how you can factor these. First of all, if you've got the y squareds at the end and a y in the middle, all you have to do is add a y with your 5 and with your negative 2. And you'll find when you FOIL this that you're going to get this trinomial. This one, with the y squared at the beginning, all you have to do is make your firsts xy and xy. In your inners, you're going to get 5xy minus 2xy gives you 3xy. This one that starts with x to the 4th, instead of starting with x and x in your binomials, you're going to start with x squared and x squared. Because when you multiply those, you're going to get x to the 4th. And notice that it will give you x squareds in your inners and outers. Similarly, when you start with x to the 6th, your factors are going to start with x to the 3rd and x to the 3rd. And notice that your inners and your outers will be x to the 3rds. This last one here, instead of starting with x and x, we're going to start with 1 and 1. But our lasts, with the 5 and the 2, we're going to have an x with each of those. So plus 5x minus 2x. So all this really has to do with the placement of x's and y's. So let's go ahead to the bottom of the page and we will go through an example together. All right, let's take a look at this. First of all, we have x squared minus 2x minus 3. That's the simple one. We can do that one on our own. What multiplies to negative 3 and adds to negative 2? Well, that would be negative 3 and positive 1. So this equals x minus 3, x plus 1. So that's what we're going to start with. Let's make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to write. Okay, next we have the same numbers except we have a y squared at the end. All that means for us is that we're going to have x minus 3y and x plus 1y. You don't have to write the 1, you can just write x plus y. With C, we have the y's at the beginning. So we're going to start with xy. So xy minus 3, and we're going to have xy plus 1. In D, we're starting with x to the fourth. What that means for our factors is that we'll have x squared and x squared. So the way that this will work is we'll have x squared minus 3, x squared plus 1. All of these are based on this original trinomial and its original factors right here. With each of these, I'm just going up to look at these factors and figuring out what I have to do a little bit different. So let's go to E. I'm starting with x to the sixth. What that means for me is that my factors will start with x to the third and x to the third. So I'm going to have x to the third minus 3 and x to the third plus 1. Now my last one, this is probably a little more difficult. This, instead of starting with x and x, is going to start with 1 and 1. And what I'm going to end with was my minus 3 and minus 1, but I'm going to put my x's with it. So minus 3x, and instead of plus 1, I have plus x. When I FOIL these, I can check to make sure that I got the same trinomial that I began with.